DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We're joined now by Troy Clardy, Stanford Cardinal, play-by-play broadcaster. Troy, good morning.
Good morning to you guys. Hope you guys are doing great. And it's going to be kind of neat to actually hop on a plane and actually only go about an hour and a half. I'd forgotten what this felt like.
With the ACC, yeah.
ACC road games and then a season opener in Hawaii. Yeah, you've been on some long plane flights. In a season of mystery at Stanford, what did you learn from game one at Hawaii with an interim coach and a constantly evolving roster?
Yeah, it's amazing. And week one, or at least week zero for Stanford, usually is all about overreaction, right? I mean, because clearly Texas fans are clearly approaching everything with level heads and clear eyes and everything like that after that result in Columbus. Not only North Carolina fans are approaching things in measured ways after that stink bomb they laid on Monday night. As for Stanford and what happened a week and a half ago over in Hawaii, the 23-20 loss there in Honolulu, you know, it's tough to kind of go into that game exactly knowing what to expect. You know, new coach with Frank Reich here in the interim, new offensive scheme for the most part. I think there were more expectations on the defensive side of the ball with the number of returners that were coming back and with a lot more known quantities, I think, on that side of the ball. So, and I think by and large the defense did well. You know, Hawaii runs that run and shoot. You know, you expect dudes to go up there and throw for 350, 400 yards on 50, 55 passing attempts out there every single time, and that didn't happen. They didn't make any big plays through the air, but Hawaii made enough little plays through the air, and Stanford made zero little plays through the air. No passing game whatsoever. And look, Stanford historically, you know, has been known for throwing the ball. You know, obviously, the last 15 years or so, when they were known for intellectual brutality, it became physicality. But Stanford historically has put its bread and butter on throwing the football. They were not able to do that at all last week. So, you know, things need to change in that direction. Good to see actual real live production from the running backs in the running game. That was nice. So, you know, good things to build on, but, you know, you combine the lack of a passing game with 7 penalties, matching Stanford's season high from last year. There was certainly a lot to clean up during this previous bye week heading into this week against BYU.
Well, who's going to be doing the throwing? Gil Branson got the start, 15 of 30. Obviously not good enough. That pick sets up there was a real turning point at the end of the game there, and Hawaii wins it. I've been reading stuff that Reich may be open to changing. I know Elijah Brown was the hotshot recruit out of Mater Dei, but I look at the depth chart, and it lists Gil Branson. There's not an or there. Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, Gil Branson's going to be the guy until further notice. And I think it's simple as that. Now, I'm not sure, you know, how much leeway Ben is going to have this upcoming week if things don't go well, if the Stanford passing game once again is rather stagnant. And look, you know, I mean, there are a lot of different components of the passing game, right? It's not just the quarterback, even though the quarterback has to rise above everything and shine and make plays. And Ben clearly did not do that. Had one nice throw against late in the game to a fourth-string tight end, Chico Holt. Stanford's going to throw some tight ends at you. But they had a nice throw for 36 yards on what could have been Stanford's dagger drive, but eventually ended in that game-turning interception that you just mentioned. You know, it's the offensive line. They need to protect. Whole new left side of the offensive line, brand new center, that's part of it. And the receivers need to get separation too and fight for contested balls. And I think in a couple of key instances, I'm not sure that we necessarily saw that from the receivers. So there are all sorts of different components that go into an effective passing game. But again, it is more often than not, whether it's right or wrong, you know, all the focus and all the credit and all the blame generally goes towards the quarterback. I'm not under the impression right now that, you know, Gil Branson, you know, is in serious danger of losing his job. Now that could change if things don't go right on Saturday. We'll see, but I'm not under that impression right now.
I saw 43 rushing attempts to 30 passing attempts, and I wondered, even though coaches say stuff about being 50-50 and balanced, all that, Did they run the ball even more? Ford, Irvin, and Tab all had good numbers one way or another. Ford was over 100 yards. Irvin, 10 carries, 46 yards. That's pretty good production there. And Tab had 4 carries for 26. So is it just run it some more? And, Ford had 26 carries. Maybe that's the most he can do. So get the other guys some carries too and really limit the passing game and shorten the game. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, and you mentioned the number of carries, and while that certainly is an eye-popping number, you'd kind of like to see the yardage per carry maybe increase just a little more. Stanford had 2 very long marathon drives against Hawaii in the season opener. Their opening drive took the opening kickoff, 15 plays, 70 yards, took 7.5 minutes off the clock. Unfortunately, that only resulted in the field goal, and that kind of was a theme for Stanford as well, having to settle for 3s instead of getting 6s. The whole thing changes if it's 14-0 early instead of 10-0 early. And then later on in the game, Stanford had a 20-play, 85-yard drive that took over 9 minutes off the clock. So it was just constant, steady gains, mostly on the ground. And that certainly is something that is encouraging to see. Micah Ford, who has kind of been the established as the workhorse here early on. He's going to get the majority of snaps at running back. They're down Chris Davis Jr., who was injured last week and not on the trip to Hawaii. He's not even on the depth chart this week, and that also affects special teams as well, as Chris Davis was supposed to be the main kick returner and punt returner as well. So that kind of affects things in that respect too. But you still have Cedric Irvin, you still have Cole Tab, and you also have Champ Hampton who can maybe come in reserve as well. So there certainly is a very deep running back core. You don't necessarily like to have that depth tested, right? Because certainly, if injuries can certainly wipe out entire rooms quick, fast, and in a hurry. So, it'll be intriguing. And look, you guys know BYU's defense, one of the best, one of the most active, certainly west of the Mississippi, maybe one of the best linebacking groups in the entire country. So that's going to be a tough nut to crack. And I'm not exactly sure if Stanford is going to be best served by, obviously, ball control is nice, but 1st and 10, if you're going to hand it off on 1st and 10, it better not necessarily result in 2nd and 7, right? It needs to result in 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, get into 2nd and manageable, stay in more manageable situations there. So, the running game is going to be key, but really it's really going to depend on whether Stanford finds a passing game or not, if they can really make strides against a tough BYU defense.
You speak of that new offensive line, and you got a bunch of transfers, which is unusual because I think last year Stanford only took 4. This year they took 17 transfers, and you've got, as I say, transfers along the offensive line. How do they handle the transfers there? Because a lot of programs bring in way more than Stanford does.
Well, obviously the big thing here with Stanford is that it's the admissions office, and Stanford has some of the most stringent admissions requirements in the country, and by and large, those are not going to change because that kind of helps make Stanford the university that it is. Now, that being said, the big thing wasn't necessarily, lessening the standards, dropping the standards down to be able to be able to bring in more transfers. That wasn't the problem. The standards were not the problem. The issue was the process. And the Stanford admissions office was probably a little bit slow in coming around to being willing to streamline their process a little bit and speed up their process a little bit instead of saying, hey, look, we only make all of our decisions in the spring and maybe some early entry kids, and that's it. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily work in this day and age on an athletic timeline because that means you can't bring in guys after the spring transfer portal window was done. You can't bring in guys in June and in other parts of the year as well. So it wasn't necessarily the standards, it was the process. And there has been progress made on that front. New president for Stanford came into office a year ago. He certainly has been much more embracing of what athletics can do and the positive things that it can bring to a university's ecosystem. He was behind bringing on Andrew Luck as the general manager, and Andrew's done a lot of hard work in trying to restore the program, restore awareness of the program, get the word out about the program, and just kind of re-energize and restoke the fan base here a little bit. So, really, there are so many different things that go into having a successful program, right? And a lot of those things don't just happen in the football office itself. You need the support from other facets of the university as well. And at Stanford, that includes the university leadership, and it also includes the admissions office because they have a lot of sway in how things work on that campus. So now with both of those areas involved, it's been a little bit more, it's been a bit easier to get the transfers involved. 17 transfers in. They only brought 13 transfers in total from 2020 to 2024. So that's big-time progress in that area.
At the last Pac-12 Media Day, I remember Stanford and Cal players both echoing we're not really in NIL here. Getting a degree from these schools and knowing these alumni, that's the real prize. And I get it. There is real value in those degrees and real value in knowing the alumni. But players still want cash in the here and now. Is that changing?
That appears to be changing just a bit. Now, I'm not quite privy to all of those, to that side of things. But it is how you're going to have to compete in this day and age, right? It is what it is. And whether it goes against what you've stood for, perhaps in some respects, over the past few decades or whatever, in this day and age with the ever-changing landscape of college sports, if you want to play, more often than not, you're going to have to pay. Now, whether you bring a student athlete in here who does recognize and does realize the value of a Stanford degree, and maybe that overtakes every other consideration, then hey, that's great. How many of those guys are out there? How many of those guys are top-notch, football players and can maybe turn around the program and have an impact right away? I don't know, but it certainly is going to be something intriguing to watch and see, and see. I'm not sure if this is something that's going to necessarily turn around, overnight, right away. We just talked about how slow the admissions office was to turn around, but certainly maybe it's a bit easier to turn that around a bit more quickly. But that might be a bit of a process. We'll see.
We see that BYU plays Portland State and puts 69 on them, and they start Bachmeier, the freshman who spent the spring practice up there with Stanford and then takes off, and he doesn't play the second half. And it's like, okay, well, we had to get through this. The second game, you look at particularly what we're looking for BYU's offense. I think this is going to be a great test because Stanford's defense is pretty good. I think they're loaded at linebacker, and Matt Rose is a really good player. But you look at throughout the three levels of the defense, a lot of experience, a lot of fifth-year guys, a lot of seniors, particularly up front. Just about everybody on the depth chart is somebody with experience. So I think it'll be a real good test for BYU. It's certainly a far more accurate test to get a better idea of who they are rather than what we had about what we saw last week. Just explain to us what you think of Stanford's defense, because it looks like they're pretty good.
Yeah, boy, I hope it's a more accurate test for BYU's offense this time around than certainly it was last week. I saw that final score, and I was like, okay, well, that was a bit worse than I thought it would be, and I'm not exactly sure how much I'm going to learn. And when I go back and try to piece together some things here, but I think you're right, and I alluded to a bit earlier in this chat. Certainly a lot fewer question marks on the defensive side of the ball for Stanford than there have been and still are on the offensive side. And really talking to folks, inside the program during training camp, during fall camp, and they say, look, defensive line is probably one of the strongest units on the entire team. Defensive line and tight end were the two that they signaled out in particular. And, yeah, the case can be made. The first defensive snap of the game for Stanford against Hawaii, Clay Patterson, seventh-year player, bowls in, just bull rushes up the middle, blows up a quarterback in the end zone, and Wilfredo Ibar, an edge rusher, recovers it in the end zone for a score. And you're thinking, man, one snap in, man, is the tree fence back? Is this the 76 Steelers? Man, this is going to be awesome. But Patterson, veteran guy, unfortunately, he made an unfortunate dancing with the stars moment that ended up being one of the critical plays of that game, 15 yards and an extended Hawaii drive that they later turned in to go-ahead points at the half. But Patterson, a veteran guy coming off injuries last year, Zach Rao, Anthony Franklin, Zach Bucky, who had 3 sacks against Cal, Omar Staples, Braden Marceau, Oleinka. That's a pretty stout. That's a pretty stout unit up front. Active linebackers: Matt Rose with 13 tackles against Hawaii. Teveru Tafiti, who just blew up as the season went along last year as an outside rusher with Ernest Cooper and Wilfredo Ibar in reserve. And the secondary was shorthanded last week. Colin Wright, Stanford's best corner, did not play. Was a bit dinged up during camp. I'd imagine he'll be back against BYU. Scotty Edwards, of course, the Utah, the Beehive State product, coming back home. His uncle played at BYU. All of his family played at a bunch of BYU fans. Scotty even said, hey, look, back when I was a kid going to Provo, I've rushed the field at LaVelle Edwards Stadium a few times. He was unable to go. But also in reserve, you have Brandon Nicholson and Cam Richardson, a couple of freshmen who were thrown into the fire. Trial by fire and by injury for last year. The defensive back room was just decimated for much of last year, but they gained valuable experience. Mitch Lieber, Jay Green. So yeah, experience from front to back, and they're going to be counted on and maybe leaned upon maybe a bit more than I thought they might be until Stanford discovers a passing game. So we'll see what the Stanford defense can do to dent BYU and go up against a familiar quarterback one. They had to defend that guy in spring practice a few times.
Troy, we appreciate the time as always. Enjoy the short plane flight, old school style, before you get back to, the new deal.
We might not even get a full meal on the plane this time. Man, I'm kind of bummed, but that's all right. Thanks a bunch. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and go Stanford.
Troy Clardy, Stanford Cardinal play-by-play broadcaster, joining us here on The Zone.